my friend. Yes, through pre-competitive platforms, that's a great concept. Or no, pre-competitive platforms are not yet good enough to enable that. Well, actually, no, because pre-competitive platforms, they don't work. Let's see, what are your thoughts on this? Suspense is going up. I think we can start looking at results. Interesting. Still 2%. Okay, we've got a view on, what are your thoughts on this issue about data sharing? Big Brother looking at you, Big Brother helping you? Key question. And again, through the examples and the case studies that you will hear from our panelists, you will probably be able to better sense what is going on, and you will hear the view from very different perspectives. So, thanks again. We can start the session and the panel. As I said, this session is very unique in terms of the background of everyone who's on the stage now. So I will first turn to you, Leon, and you have quite a unique background because as a director of product safety, social compliance, of course you have a certain role to play within Ahold Delhaize. But interestingly, you also have an agronomist. So the question around the data and how the data can be handled and contribute to the strategy of a large retailer group is very interesting. So could you please share your thoughts on how this digital revolution, so to speak, information technology is changing the way you would engage with your suppliers and promote or implement sustainable strategies? For instance.
Thank you, Mathieu. Well, thank you again for inviting me to this forum. I think it's very interesting to share our results here. And when I was invited to this forum, it was at a time that the Ahold and Delhaize did not use yet. You would say, well, is it relevant? Yes, it's relevant because now we are merged, and I'm sitting here and I'm looking at the job getting here as a speaker. And I have to conclude, I have to see now that we have 10 operating units in 11 countries, and we are even not talking about external data, but we are first talking about internal systems and data and everything which is fragmented and calculated in another way. And I think that's exactly what you're talking about also outside the company. Because the main thing, of course, is what we're really talking about. So, just to be very clear, as a retailer, we do not produce anything. We just show off the products made by somebody else. We put our brand on, and of course, that gives us a responsibility. But it also tells that we never can be a specialist in all the products that we have on shelf. I mean, we have globally, I think, 25,000 to 30,000 own brand products on the shelf. Full assortment from food and non-food being mainly food. Of course, we can talk about big data and transparency, but what we should keep in mind is that fact. We are at the end of the chain, and we are not specialists, and we never will be. So, our starting point from that perspective is not the farmer. And I have been, as I told, with my feet in the mud, and that helped me a lot to understand. But as we need to translate it now, is that when we look at our shelves and we see a product, that's our starting point. And we look at that product and see, well, is it the expected quality? Is it food safe? Because if we sell food, that's the first thing that's very important, and that's a black and white thing. There's no compromise on that. And is it responsibly produced? That's the responsibility. And that all to give the customer trust and a good feeling. And that's very important to us because the whole range of products is always the same brand that's over and over again, independent of what's in almost. And then we have the split in our case, where we say, and that's also relevant to this discussion, we have risks and we have opportunities. And risks, clearly, that's something what we feel as a company we need to cover with. Third-party audit and a certificate. And it's a yes or a no, you either comply or you don't comply. And the second thing is that we also can look at improvement areas, continuous improvement. And that can be in other areas, mainly environmental usually, but also, and I will come back to that also when I tell a little bit about the activities in detail, can also be on top of either social compliance or food safety. But data collection is not new. In food, we have a long history with data collection. Because years and years ago, we already asked our farmers and producers collect the data and show us that they're doing the right thing. And as soon as possible, we run away from that principle because it was very counterproductive. Farmer got fed up with collecting data, and we ended up with a pile of paper that we didn't do anything with. And that's a big pitfall still. So we put it in certification schemes, we left the data at the farmer's level, and we organized it in that way. So it's the certificate. But then that was on the risk side. Also in social audits, we have some multiple years of experience, but also very much fragmented. Very local in the supply chain. So we do this at a cotton plant, we do this at a wheat plant, we do this at a production site for producing grapes. It's all different. But as an organization, and we have discussed that already in the first session, we have an order in which we approach big issues, both the risks. So, well, we first create an ambition level, and that's what we do based on all the stakeholders' demands and what we think ourselves. And then, following to that, we need to make use, or we try to make use of initiatives that are already defined. So we don't create our own certifications. And that's resulted in ending up on the social compliance side with more than 20 social compliance audits in 2007. Depending on the sector, depending on the area where you're in. Can be very specific and can be very general. So if you choose any of those audit schemes, for us, it's covered. And that's probably helping a lot at the producer side, but not at our side. Because it would have been much more easy for us to impose a scheme to all our suppliers that we could generate the data set at our end, which was very uniform and which was very straightforward to be analyzed. Now we are ending up with 20 data sets, of which some of them even don't exist because it's just one page with a certificate, no background. That's a challenge. So also from that point of view, and that was also in the first discussion, you might wonder what's the added value of consumer labels. Because consumer labels typically have one scheme imposed on the whole supply chain and with no alternative. And if you use it to tell the customer something that the customer understands, right. But if it's just to show that there was an audit, you might make other choices and say, well, let's leave the label off and let's go for more choice for the suppliers. This week I was at the Global Gap Summit in Amsterdam, where I met some of you already, so it's no new for those. And the question was, also on a poll like this, is data going to replace the audit? And the vast majority, you could expect that from a Global Gap audience, which are all committed to this certification scheme, the majority said no, we are not going to replace you. But the next question was, do you expect that big data will have an influence on the way we audit on farm? And also there, the vast majority said yes. And I think that's exactly the framework that we're in. We are not in black and white. Last half year, well, fairly sitting next to me, we did a pilot also with IBC and the farm sustainability assessment side of it. And we did that on top of global gap. Global gap after the safety certification group suggests it's safe enough, but not going deep enough for sustainability, for environmental criteria. So well, let's do the FZ. And actually, we had some good learnings. Because what we learn is that we do not just need a checklist, but we need methods. If we want to really to monitor something, we need methods, and we need uniform methods. And we need that not only for us, but also to give value back to the farmer. We do not help the farmer by having to take the box question. And then we also concluded that we have very good users, because they said it's not ambitious enough. And that's also a challenge of the schemes that we currently use. It's very much focused on minimal criteria, on compliance criteria still, even when it's not a real certification. But they need to be ambitious enough. And also to be ambitious enough, you need to measure, because then you're on scale. Because yes and no. And then we need also data to transfer the message to our customers, to our consumers, as far as it's possible. If we want to communicate anything about the garden, it's going to be in numbers. Except when we communicate well. We do not like deforestation, and we guarantee that. That's a big box, if we are talking about carbon or water or nutrients or whatever, then it's usually numbers. And that same is valid for when we are using BCI. We are quite an enthusiastic member of BCI. But also there, we use those audits, while all the background information about the audit is available, and we use it like yes or no, pass or no pass situation. We're really good enough on supply, or not good enough. We work on your non-compliances. If you're good enough, you're good. And also there, we are thinking as a company of analyzing those data, going to, and I can tell you, we are studying that, and it's not easy, because you need to target specific areas that have impact at a specific way, in a specific sector, and you don't want to bother all your suppliers with the same topic. So you need to come much more specific there. That's where data is going to help us. So, going to the end of my contribution, at the product level, it's still too difficult for us to profile ourselves with data. And it's sure big data, because before we are in the stage that we can use it, also big data, we are still at the level of small data. And small data, which are not comparable with the skins, which are not reliable always. So that's a big step to win. So indicators must be measured in a uniform way, and there should be, and that was the challenge I started with telling about our own company, there should be interconnections between data. It doesn't make sense that every supply chain fills out questionnaires for 2, 3, 4, many data. They should be interconnected. They all want to big part. So, and then you first should do that in a business-to-business way. Because business-to-business, and then you're also coming to what's competitive, what's pre-competitive. That would have been a better question to ask first, before you could answer that first question. But in a business-to-business situation, you can work much more extensively, both with suppliers and with than when we are in the open field directly. So, product associated are part of the product. I mean, the product is not a product, we need to be data with it. Data about quality, food safety, social compliance when it's applicable. In decent chain of custody of somebody of risk of either you're working on either chain of custody norm currently, but we also see that that topic is treated in a completely different way in many different schools, and we need some other. And then there is also a shell of data that he should not, but also could not supply to the customer. I mean, the customer feels comfortable when they find data themselves, which confirms what they think and what they get with the product. So it's not up to us to generate that data, but it would be very nice when it would be in line with what the consumer think, at least to get them to feel trusted.
Thank you very much. Brilliant and inspiring. Now I'd like to turn to Thomas Vera. So you're leading the digital solutions at Nestle. And what I like also very much from your background is all these technological thinking you have and what you had at EPFL. I mean, I was looking at Google, trying to find information about you. Thank you, Big Brother. Thank you, data and technology. So taking this data into consideration, what your insights and the technological perspective you have, plus of course your mission within Nestle, how do you see it? How do you actually use technology and what solutions that benefit obviously mandates of your organization, but then also actually the whole supply chain? So we'd love to hear your views on that.
Sure, thank you very much for that introduction. There's been a clear evolution in the last years, and I think it accelerates all the more as we grow, together with the digital revolution. I'd like to take you through a couple of examples showing that evolution I was talking about around the transparency and the data collection and management in our supply chain. And for that, the first example I would like to take is dairy. This is a typical milk collection chain in India, for example, but also in Peru or in Colombia, where you have from farmer to different parties all the way down to a Nestle factory, for example, and then converts it into the product. Now, each of these points represents an entity that needs to be paid, and also a point where quality and composition of the milk needs to be tracked, as well as the traceability of where that milk is. This, in the case of milk, is a short chain in the sense of time, because from the farm, from the cow, if you want to the factory, the milk should not be longer than 24 hours. That should not take longer than 24 hours to be made into the final product, which is powder. Now, because of the shortness of the chain, because we are so involved in managing pretty much all of it, we have developed solutions to manage that entirely internally. Now, the accessibility of mobile devices has allowed us to digitalize it and to have real-time data of that chain, which in the past we didn't have. So I represented that by those barcodes, which is mostly what we use in most countries, barcodes to have a reliable identification of each point in the chain. This is about 6 years old, for example, the solution we have running in India. Now, as you can see, this is driven mainly by quality, food safety, and managing the payment. Now, because we have all that data, and because it is real time, we are exploring on ways to make this visible to our consumers, which is not as easy as you think. And this takes me to the second example. This is on another commodity that we purchased, which is coffee, where we have a solution called FARM, which stands for Farmer Relationship Management System. And here the approach, this is a much newer solution, it's about 2 years old. And the approach we have taken here in a much longer and more complex supply chain, because unlike in dairy, we have less control and less visibility. We depend a lot more on the collaboration with third parties. Now, what we have implemented is a field application, running on a tablet or a mobile phone, where in most cases our third parties or our own agronomists and auditors, in a way, will track farmer and farm data, and particularly the assessments we do. These assessments we have developed with NGO, and we use them to drive our labels. The Nescafe plan, the Nespresso AAA program, and soon the Cocoa plan and the Dairy for You plan. So these assessments that you can see there on the second screenshot are these audit-related questions where, depending on the type of assessment, that one has three answers. You have red with given actions, yellow with also given actions, and a green, which is plus. Now, for the traceability information, we rely on the third parties because Nestle, except in very, very few cases, we don't buy directly. So we rely on the third parties to manage that traceability and quality tracking data from the buying station all the way to our factory. And we have embedded this into this solution. So basically, we have standardized the way we want to obtain this data from our clients, so that we can put it into the tool and then we can report it. So you can see here, we have our agronomists running the field application, our agronomists or third-party agronomists. We have the management staff in the markets or in headquarters using the application report. And what we have done through Nespresso, because as you know, they have the Nespresso routines, we are sharing this with the consumer. It's a pilot at the moment, but it will be released to all consumers soon. And that's a dashboard you see, where basically you can click and you can see where your coffee is coming from, all the way down to the farm using a kind of Google approach, basically GIS. So we want to expand this to dairy. We want to expand this to dairy. And finally, looking forward, Nestle has spent a lot of time, money, in connecting with our consumers through e-commerce platforms, Silicon Valley Innovation Office, we have created things like people leading this digital revolution, interacting with the biggest partners in terms of consumer engagement, and such as Facebook and so on. But we believe that the key part for the future is the farmer himself. So we have some solutions around that, obviously procurement farms I talked about, the solution I talked about. But this new initiative is really about the farmer himself, and we're calling it farmer connectivity. What we want is to achieve a unified solution. What we see that the future is a connected digital chain from the farmer all the way to the consumer, as you can see there. Now, there's two things here. For this project specifically, we have taken a much more open approach than what we have taken in other projects. We are working collaboratively with our partners, suppliers, and since it's really the only way we can touch a global mass of farmers. Now we focus particularly in developing countries, whereas in developed countries we want, we go through these platforms, through these specifications and so on. Now we see the potential for digitalizing the farmers, because they can provide some of that traceability and security information themselves, but also because we can then, in exchange, share with them in a much easier way than by our agronomists and our training courses, knowledge. We can share knowledge. Imagine a video where we share farming practices and so on. So that, to summarize, we see the future as a connected digital chain.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Thomas. That was very exciting. So this leads us to the big question about different data for different data needs, and of course, from a corporate perspective and a farm perspective, the integrated approach makes a lot of sense. Challenges, but still solutions in the making. It's not going to be kind of implemented. Very exciting. Thank you very much. I would like to now turn to Daryl Darren, with the Foreign Trade Association. Daryl, you have a great experience. You have traveled the world. You have lots of experience in Asia and in China. And now with the FDA, I mean, and having such a huge membership, you have a very unique perspective on what is going on in different geographies, but also across a huge number of corporations. So I'd like to hear from your perspective how data is actually changing the way that you are operating and designing their sustainable strategies. How does this really impact not only their own companies and corporations, but the whole chain? And looking at the data, again, from the two ways perspective, from the data collection, because I need the data as a company, but also from the other side, like, does the data also help?
Great, and thank you very much for having me on the panel today. So let me kind of go through my notes that I've taken and address maybe some of the questions. And so I guess the question is about pre-competitive and can companies work together, should companies work together? I'm going to reference something that Leon said. This is nothing new. So at the Foreign Trade Association, BSCI, might be more familiar with that part of our program, that's how we were built. So we were built on a program, a platform by which companies can perform social compliance audits through third-party audit firms and then share that data with each other. That's been going on for 13 years. So when we hear like, hey, transparency and where we should share data, we've been doing that for a really long time. And so for us, that's nothing new. To give you an idea of what we're talking about, we just kind of, as we, I think the prior panel had asked questions about what's the value of sharing that data. So we actually asked ourselves that question in our conference last year. We went back and did the numbers. We went back through and showed how much is saved and just avoided audits by sharing data. Now, there's a substantial amount of value derived from sharing of audits or sharing of information that goes beyond kind of pure monetary position. But to kind of get to that, we estimate that we avoid something like 40,000 audits a year. We save our members 72 million euro a year just by participating in the network. These are based on averages, and of course averages are great numbers, and we start to dig into it. But broadly speaking, as a system, we derive, our members derive value from kind of that avoidance of duplicated effort, the richness of shared data. And I think for producers, and I think it goes back actually to something you had said about who derives value along the chain. I think one of the key points for us was going at the producer level. We did the math that indicates that from a data collection standpoint, not having to redo the data that go along with that, the producers save, we estimate about 369 man years worth of work at the producer level by not having to duplicate any of that data. So what does that mean? So it means we have an enormous amount of data, and it gets to the question, who uses it? So the uncomfortable truth is, virtually no one. We all want to sit in a nice room like this and say, we're going to use all of this data and drill down into the producer level, and I'm going to be able to work with somebody and do this perfect thing at the supplier level. I can tell you that the adoption rate is about 3% of organizations globally use the data in a way that we would see as being kind of substantially value added. To give you an idea, I was at a conference and I was in Hong Kong, and the question came up, yes, this is great, but has anyone ever changed their sourcing based on your sustainability big data? The answer was no. So the question comes back, then why are you collecting that data? I would argue that that's not a negative comment so much as that is a pretty positive comment. So I would argue that at this stage, I think where we are is a very immature stage. So the discussion of using big data, I think at large and very sophisticated organizations like Nestle, I think there's kind of baked into what you're already doing. So for time-sensitive products, that makes all the sense in the world. I think that the value is yet to be able to be kind of shown and demonstrated at the producer level in many cases, depending on the commodity, at the production level, at the manufacturing cycle, and at the retail level. I think those are yet to be made clear. When I say yet to be made clear, I would argue that that's coming. So again, it's not yet clear that everybody said, I want to participate in sustainable coffee, but how many people at the coffee break when asked, was this coffee source sustainable? I did not. And this is kind of what I do for a living. And so I rely on other organizations. And those other organizations, that adoption rate, I think, is increasing, will increase in the future. So the first part is that says that big data, not new. The use of big data, I think, is emerging. So, and I would argue that that rate is going to continue over time. When we get down to labeling and the discussion there, remember there are 466 active environmental labels in the marketplace today. 466. I don't know which ones are good. I don't know. I know which ones that I think are very good, but the others I don't know, and I have no visibility into that. And I think consumers might not either. So as we start thinking about reliance, I think reliance is going to come to those selected few players who use their data well, who are able to demonstrate how that affects the end producer, the end consumer. I think those types of companies are going to do very well in the data space, and I think that those kind of vanguards in the industry are things that are going to drag people along, willingly or not, into their wake. So I would argue that watching companies like what Nestle is doing, for example, what Apple is doing, as they start to use that data as part of their system, I would argue that they're a small minority, but I would argue that that minority is going to be groundbreaking. As far as tools and dashboards, we launched dashboards for all of our members. We gave everyone access to all of their data. Adoption rate has been pretty good. Use of that has been not as great as you might expect. And so why is that? It's because I think we've yet to, again, go back to a prior comment, yet to be able to internally articulate the value of that. Is there underlying complexity? Do you have 20 or 25 different certification schemes, and is the data a little bit different? Yes, I think that's probably true. But also understand that there's a certain amount of resistance to big data. Right? So there's collection fatigue at the producer side of the house. Again, that data is not yet, the underlying value has not yet been made clear to them. Audit firms and certification bodies are resistant to big data. We want to think that they are not, but in fact they are, in the way that would be, here's the great example when everybody says we should collaborate. Translation of that is that you should use my standard. Right? And that's what that means. And so, but as you start thinking about that, big data means what I say it does. But if you have a different idea, then you want to go to concept, which drives you to 25 different schemes. So I think there's going to be there's a future there where we would hopefully kind of narrow down the number of things that we would all need. And then companies themselves who do not yet see the value of collaboration, who see their sustainability profile or their quality profile or whatever that profile happens to be as a competitive advantage that they want to stay ahead of their competition. I think those companies are, I think they're well served in 2016 to maintain that strategy. I would say that that strategy has a very short fuse. I don't think there's a lot of space for that anymore. Consumers simply won't put up with that. So data as a key part of their strategy, I think, is also important. And then for me, that's about it.
Well, very great. Thank you very much for your opinions on that, because we're going to be challenging a little bit the concept of certification per se. I mean, certification, getting your data, yes, will not be used, will not be really free exposed of the potential. That will probably be a discussion point with the audience. We have to do the drive for transparency. So thank you very much, Aaron, for your discussion. I'd like to actually do you, Emily. Emily, those of you who don't know her yet, and that would be a shame, Emily has been with the Sci Platform since the inception of Sci Platform, so 2002, and really knows inside out a lot of the trends that happen in the food and beverage industry. So looking at those years back and all the experience you have, can you let us know the changes you have seen? I mean, from those big players willing to, oh, let's work together, let's collaborate, how can that really make sense? And then from a digital revolution perspective, or using information technologies, do you see any change in the way those techniques or technologies or apps or those solutions have been used? And maybe Sky Platform also played a role in leading those discussions. So please share with us your experience and answering.
I don't think you for making me feel like a dinosaur. It's been there for a long time. And you're right, there's been a big evolution. In 2002, Cybertron was launched by Nestle, Unilever, and then the idea was it took quite a number of years for the members at the time to be in the group, but by the way, now we have about 90 members. To become comfortable with the idea of sharing information. At the time, I remember the rules of what's competitive very clearly, and very quickly people got to realize that there was much more to gain to actually share than to decide. And usually when people come to meetings, they're actually surprised by the level of needs that there is in the room. Still, it took almost 10 years, I would say, to come to a level what we're talking about now, whereby you actually share the information. But it's still not very easy. So it took 10 years to come to an agreement about what is meant by sustainable production of a number of activities, and to have companies actually finding it interesting to have a common definition and to implement together. It was only about 3 years ago that we decided, okay, it's great to have principles and practices for coffee production or for dairy production, but still every company is then translating this guidance, this common reference, into their own code. So we have Unilever code, we have the Nestle code. They're all asking different questions to farmers and suppliers and so forth. That's when we launched FSA, the Farm Sustainability Assessment, which some of you have heard about my presentation yesterday. And FSA is about having a common reference and also having an online tool that we designed with ITC so that farmers and suppliers can enter data and can share data with the providers, with the environment. The challenge lies is actually how much do the providers want to share about their supply chain, their suppliers, and how their suppliers do. And that's really something we are working on. We see an interest because there is a lot of efficiency to be gained, a lot of costs to be saved. If you share information, then if you buy from the same supplier or the same farmer, you may not have to send several others. So this is not to send one Marxist to send everything before. So that means uncovering parts of the supply chain to the competitors. And that's the numbers. And then we say, I'm also coordinating a very practical project with Spain on strawberry and other goods production that Leon knows about, this and it's very interesting because we are all in the same boat, wanting to develop best practices to help farmers use less water in a place where water is scarce and the nearby park is really present. And we developed a tool that allows all of the companies to check how well their suppliers are doing with their storage. Are they placed in the rural area? That's actually something we all assume. Everybody thinks that those who buy from rural farmers, it's not as easy from the particular environmental standards and social standards. And already here, if we see in Chinese, we have companies that have an interest in the tool, but are sending me back a contract with a lot of comments from the legal department as to add all of those clauses about site would be reliable if any of the information is leaked, etc., etc. But we try to change the mindset, saying that actually sustainability is about working all together, making a difference and achieving our goals over this very competitive culture. We need to keep
Thank you very much, Emily, and again, also very good projects and very good ground where these companies are trying to find a solution around putting certain information and data on their strategies. Before turning to the audience and to the floor, I'd like to have one question for both of you here. Because we're hearing a lot about, yes, the data, but how do we use it, and then everyone looks for the data, but so we pay for it, we invest in yes, but then that's my data, and we share, although we not share, we collaborate. So the challenges that companies and organizations like yours are facing, and challenges that certification systems are also facing, is that there is a definite need for new models and innovation around the data. Innovation where really just having the paperwork of the
the certificate is not sufficient necessarily, or doesn't tell the whole story around the sustainability level of a supplier or a grower. Now, we heard, and I totally agree with that, that from a business management perspective, managing risks still is at the top of the priorities. So a third-party audit is still necessary. And can data replace the audit? Well, answer that. Yeah, no, I agree. The data itself will not probably replace the audit. But there are innovative models that are being developed by the scheme owners, by the companies, by the organizations overarching different companies. So, good question, and I'd like to ask you for a very short statement, but what do you think would be the key drivers for innovation within your organization or companies that are managed? So what do you see are key drivers that promote innovation, and then how does that impact the company? So if you have two thoughts and one statement, then I will go, and we can go into just one as well.
I think it's very short then. The key driver for us from this perspective is to leave the risk level and go into the opportunity. And that's really the driver for us, because then we feel comfortable. And then we can also have the other players in our supply chains committed to work with it and to see the other side. Thank you very much.
Well, for me, because most of the ones we buy come from developing countries, I think the enabler of where innovation will come is that the accessibility of digital devices will allow us to reach a lot more farmers. Now, will the quality of that data be enough? Will we, can the data replace the auditors? That's an easy question. But I think the more and more everybody's digitalized, then the more we can track.
From my perspective, actually, Leon took most of my answer, which is to say if we can kind of transition from a risk model and more towards an opportunity model, I think a lot more of the business. I think that would provide a drive towards transition to this kind of model.
Because we can actually say to the contrary, as a platform, I would say that we see no questions in integrating data, more data identify these risks, and we're joint efforts in the so in fact we've been working with as we mentioned TC business, so the opportunities for this and that company have interest in sourcing more sustainable opportunities together. But increasingly we'd like to use the data generated by FSA and others to have a really strategic view of which are the main social and environmental challenges also in face, and then trying to put together this strong partnership.
Thank you very much, panelists. Those great interventions. I'd like to turn now to the floor. I'd like to ask you to have your comments or questions as brief as possible. Just introduce yourself, and then if the question is for one panelist in particular, please mention this, or just say this is for everyone to reflect or to brainstorm on your comments. So, is there anyone who'd like to start? Or
Yes, hi. My name is Dr. Rebecca Jorgensen, and I am a specialist in intercultural and mass media communications. And my recent research has been on consumer perceptions of brands that are being obtained through the media by use of these kinds of labels, whether it's for organic or other things. And my question is directed to the panel in general, but what we've seen in the research is that there are two serious issues with reliance on big data as a means of promoting consumer confidence or public confidence. And one issue is with the question of self-reporting, whether that creates really reliable data. We've seen that in terms of self-reporting in cars and other things, and that's general a component of business and some skepticism. And the second is this resistance to the idea of big data being able to tell the whole story. When you showed the picture of the farm, I will tell you that as a consumer at Starbucks or Nestle, I, as a consumer, may want to see that photograph of the farm more than I want to see a statistical table about the bacteria content in the milk or whatever it is. These are selling points. So I just wanted to ask you how you were addressing this possible pushback from the consumer in terms of this reliance on big data for these two issues.
We have another question.
My name is Rajesh. Thanks for sharing those positive and encouraging developments. In continuation of the previous session, we also about WPO and NTC roles in supporting SMEs, and the final closing remarks from the retail side from about supporting this question is directed at the FDA because they have leadership, the regional suppliers and perhaps any auditing standard. Theoretically, is it possible to release anonymously an average, it's a dangerous approach, but an average showcasing in which countries, of which sectors there are issues, or perhaps social compliance areas, perhaps on other topics, so that WTO and ITC could take it up and support in capacity development? And the second part of the question is, you also recently launched an initiative by the name Data, which goes in the direction of environmental topics. Theoretically, will there be a possibility to have a correlation to show when on the social side there's weakness on aspect A or B, it ends up on non-compliance on aspect X in the environment?
Thank you very much. We may take one or two more and then back to the panelists. Yes, please.
Hello, I am Claude Dubois, working for Pontis, LC, and Sustainability Consultancy. I have a question for Nestlé. What we observed actually in the field in countries like Colombia is that small players, small farmers face quite a lot of difficulties to know accurately the data, their data in the fields, typically amount of water for irrigation, the amount of pesticides, fertilizers, and especially also the data for deforestation, which is even worse for them to know anything about. How do you cope with that to engage, keep them engaged, also the small players, the small holders? Thank you.
Okay, I just take those two more and then
this is Bernard Lassina from ISO. I would like to know what, in order to collect data and aggregate data and to cooperate between different organizations, you need, so to say, include semantics of the data and standardization of the data elements and the meaning of data elements. To which extent has this work been done or is ongoing? What's the status of the standardization of data elements you use when you work in the data you exchange?
Yes, I think Gabriela Alvarez. Taken from the producer side, in a way, from this. So a lot of what we're talking in digital is about extracting data. So how do we extract it all the way from the farm? I think Tomas started talking also a bit about the other side, how do you bring back data? I think as a farm management tool, because we are so worried a bit about is it compliant, but rather can we just turn a lot of this into how do we better manage the farm? And we were surprised sometimes you go back to a farmer and you just think with 2 or 3 pieces of data, here's what he did on fertilizer, here's how much it rained, and this is how much he sold, and they're surprised. So finally they can use that data to do something. So maybe taking the same chain but the other direction. And maybe on that as well, we always talk again about the chain from the farmer to the buyer. What about turning it back and looking at how the buyer behaves with the farmer in a way? So we talked a lot about certifications, and there's still a lot of way to go in certifying good suppliers. But can we certify good buyers? Can we start bringing some of the data and say, these are practices, these are relationships, these are standards, on what it makes a good buyer? And some of the companies there would win with that, but it's not really registered. So our new certification says we only have 200 or something. have to under one and do one of those challenges for that.
Thank you very much, Gabriela. So I will turn back to my panel to answer those questions. We have hot questions, some confirmations, and some very specific for some of you. So I will try to read them now. We can start addressing the questions. Yeah, first on the question of the big data reporting with product, and we exactly have that problem on our own brand. And our approach is that we feel comfortable to report anything that's third party and we give numbers. And if you don't feel comfortable or we have no real hard figures, you just don't do it. And then do better and you mentioned it, stick with the picture or with endorsement of another stakeholder. It's very important. And also have attention to instead of using data towards customers. Quite misleading. Then, well, the next one was Vero. Then, well, the ISO one is interesting. And that's what maybe not for you yourselves, but the way we look at it is we first need to we have parts that we need to take care of. Data collection systems, and going with that also connection between systems, but also uniformity of indicator management. And those two need to go together. There are quite dedications going on. So platform is playing a role, other roundtables are playing a role. It's quite a common understanding that it's not easy. But I agree it is a very important one. And then the last one to be answered by me, I think, is we want to certify buyers. As a retailer, of course, that's an important topic. And we hear some comments about it. And the only thing I can say about it is that we are immediately lifted. So if you don't do a good job, it's still immediately and either not only the buyer, but also the payment terms and everything that you do with money. Especially as a stock market very big influence effect. So we cannot afford to misbehave. Although we always like to talk about it. Did you forget anything? Thank you very much. And don't hesitate to reply to pieces of information about it.
I'll start because I think they're related. I'll start with the question back there about how can we trust the big data and particularly for our consumers though. How can we commit them? So basically what we're doing in Nestle is that we are when the data that we share with our consumers, for example, in the dashboard actually, is the one that we capture ourselves or through third parties in a very carefully audited and controlled process. Same for data, where we know all the data we put together ourselves. I mean, this doesn't mean it's perfect, but it's very good quality. Now, when we talk about the big data that we get from our suppliers and the multi-tiered, we get big data from our supply chain. What we do with that is we use it to drive operational improvements around ensuring our supply. So we take actions, not so much communicating with consumers, but actually to improve operations, to manage operations. Now, we do then communicate this back to consumers back in reports. So we produce our future value reports, the ESA platform as well. So, but these reports are gathering data that we then validate, filter, and so on. That's the way. And then going to the question related to Colombia, and I'll answer together with your question. So how can we, if the farmers themselves do not know some of the metrics we want to gather from them, how do we engage with them? How do we do it? So we've seen in field studies that we did in terms of our new connected farmers solution. We wanted to address the needs of the farmers, so that's the way to engage them into the platform. And we saw that record keeping is an interest, is a need from them. So, but record keeping implies two things. They need a tool on where to keep those records, but they also need to understand how to gather the information that goes into those records. Obviously, some records are easier than others, how much they spend to fertilize, but others are more difficult, and how does a certain activity that they do impact on either water consumption and so on. So we do this, we've seen this need from the farmers, and we engage with them basically today through our agronomists. And what we want to do is to touch even more farmers faster and cheaper is through the digital solution. So basically through training videos. Again, remember that in most of the developing markets, they're illiterate. So it has to be a video that graphically and verbally explains what we need to communicate. And then encouraging them to keep track of those records in a tool that we provide. So that I think is answers the question. But also we see that there is a value in coming back to them because they don't know, they are not in a good situation to manage their business if they don't know the data. They cannot take decisions based on actual data. That's where the record keeping for us. We see a lot more the potential that they might see today, but we're confident that they will. When they can make an educated decision based on real data of the farm. Is fertilizer or pesticides what is driving the cost? Is it the labor? Maybe higher? Those kind of things. So, that's it.
Thank you so much. So we'll see if I actually took the notes. So first question was, can we trust big data? I think the answer is I don't know. And I say I don't know because I rely on third-party auditors. And so those are very trustable companies in many cases, but then you're relying upon a person who's in the field, who's had X number of days training, and so if this is that person's very first trip to X factory, how reliable is that data? So in aggregate, I would say, broadly speaking, I think that data is okay when you start to get to specifics. So that's very nice. Rakesh, for your second question, so the aggregated risk, I'm happy you're asking this question because we actually have something in this place. So in the next kind of call it 6 weeks or so, we're going to be coming up with the aggregated risk model for all of our members, including what our risk looks like globally. That is available only for BSCI members, but it is a risk that shows the top trade, social and environmental risk country by country for all the 20,000 audits we do every year. Kind of going back, I would argue 36 months, so how we would aggregate that data and pull it together. So it's going to be an interesting kind of heat map we drill down into those issues. So pretty interesting. We'll see what the update is there. I would argue, I would hope that it's strong. We'll see what actually happens. The question on ISO and the standardized metrics, is there an effort to kind of pull those together? Yes and no. Yes, everyone thinks it's a great idea. Will it actually happen? I don't know, because you get to take something that's, this sounds reductionist, so it's not what I'm trying to go for, but think about something that's simple to understand as trying to, it is a universal map. Except that, maybe it's not. And then you start to get to a very complicated question of what does that look like? And then as you start to break that down, what you realize is that you've got 35 questions based on one simple discussion. So it's just to say that it's not easy, and not to say that it's not happening. The last question that I have written down, I know I missed it from Gabriella, was the question about is there a buyer rating service? So this is actually a pretty interesting thing. We get this question a lot of times. Should buyers rate themselves? Should we have outside data that rates our buyer? So I can tell you that that is a constant, not a constant, but I would say a persistent topic that comes up. It's not yet happened. There's a product going in the marketplace now, which is rating buyers from the producer side. The problem with that being that it assumes that the producers have a certain amount of moral credibility and therefore have a better view on the buyers, so that becomes a little tricky. But I can tell you that I know the brand personally, a very large retailer that decided to do this very thing, and they said, we want to aggregate all of our big data and see if we can do it. We found out that 77% of the social compliance issues in their supply chain were directly related to their buying patterns. So what did they do? Shut down the study. So we'll see over time if more of these data start to come together. I think we can start to see behavioral changes. So, and again, it's like a data set of one, but I know that happens.
There is a users engaged. For me, I think it's like one of the biggest challenges because we only had significant users or by trying to collect data of what's happening at the farm level. And it's already a difficult to explain in itself. So if now we're trying to sort of reduce some of them having different writing already, so it's even more difficult to exercise. And so of course what needs to happen is that some companies will go for the easiest ways. And that's the reason that that was raised in the time with the saying that only the big producers and the big suppliers will be able to certify the consumers or left aside. That is also a risk for what we're doing with the FSF and the financial programs. Somebody wants to be responsible for what influence what we're using as a country. The same with actually, we talked about third-party certification. It seems as if everybody is agreeing that we need to have third-party certification because that's the most effective way. I would challenge that because it brings a lot of bigger costs. And how come we haven't done that route for other proposals, for instance, food safety? How come we take it for granted when we buy a product from Nestle or apples that once we eat it, we don't get too much? Just truly trust the brands. So why can't we do the same to the sustainability? How is that from question?
Thank you, Emily. And actually, since the beginning of the session and the questions raised, we all discussed on this issue of trust. Yes, data, but also trust. Transparency with the value chains, yes, it's great. Again, like collaboration. I want to work with you, but who are you? So I want to get back to you with one very simple question for all of you, just to put that things into perspective. The first 90-meter question, or the second one, was about actually this question for the pre-competitive platforms, the other question. And on that one, I was asking about the pre-competitive platforms. Anyone wants to collaborate and work together? I mean, Americall is part of the platforms, my platform and others, like Nestle is part of it. Well, then we have some platform that are able and we have apps. So my question is, what makes it that works? What brings trust? So if you can have just one word, one simple statement, the key drivers for bringing trust in those platforms to make this thing happen. So if you have one thought on this, then I turn back to you to see that. So the key drivers for trust in pre-competitive platforms. Is pre-competitive really something that happens, or is it more like, well, let's bring people together and start talking? Yeah, very briefly, I think the key here is multi-stakeholder engagement, where the processors, the producers, and the retailer or whoever is in supply chain have an active role, but also in association with NGOs and other organizations. And it needs to develop, but that's what we see happening in South Platform. That's the only way I think. Thank you very much.
That was going to be a good answer as well, in the sense that it's the sharing of the risk for everybody being in the same platform. And the risk for us and why we at the moment use our own data is because we cannot take the risk of a specific case summary being tracked down to our responsibility. Not reporting that correctly. So we have multi partners on the platform, everybody sharing platform and then
excellent. So we have multi-stakeholder, the sharing risks that brings the people together, so we need to work together, and stakeholders we have a balance.
Yeah, I think very similar answer. So it's the participation. And participation is the key. So for us, it's participation of companies and stakeholders, and that kind of aggregation of views, I think, provides substantially more reliable results. We move away from anecdote.
To a good question about transparency. So it links back to what you guys said about partnership. I think it's also being honest and transparent about what you're doing as a company, what are the challenges, and actually embrace what you're struggling. But things were very bad at we want to do something consumers. We're trying to be better, but it's amazing that it's not this.
Thank you very much. So you're hearing openness, multi-stakeholder process, participatory approach. How does that resonate? Do you have any question, anything about the challenge you can be working with? Not harsh, I care for them. But say your name, three statements. We have 2 minutes left, unfortunately, but let's try to take as many as possible. 1, 2.
Okay, same still from summarize. I will be a little bit provocative and with respect to Darryl. When we're talking about transparency, we're talking about sharing, collaboration, and independent platforms. Could I please ask you on behalf of us all committed to sustainability to take a leadership role? So when we talk about reporting aggregated risks and only being available to members, could you possibly give us an executive summary of that when it gets launched, available to all? Because that would actually help the transparency, help the trust, and drive it forward.
Thank you, Matthew. First of all, I think this is a really inspiration. We spent the last 4 years on the GSO, looking at sustainability, seeing how GSO that actually supports sustainability. And where the global supply chain is standing above, which has been gone through the bar for safe groceries, that's us. Where I see a great opportunity in leveraging big data, bringing about transparency and visibility, is our standard we built almost 10 years ago. Called EPCs, which brings about real supply chain visibility. It is being used in the healthcare sector, medical devices, and the aircraft sector, and many other sectors. I think this is a huge opportunity. The inspiration I got today from all of the speakers is that here is a possibility of leadership from you to mobilize a multi-stakeholder approach so we actually use a global standard to build real supply chain visibility. And that's where, of course, the various parties will obviously derive different benefits. Using one approach, a standardized approach, will make a big difference, greater simplicity, and lower cost.
Thank you. It's Gwen Pascal. I specialize in traceability. I have an information I would like to suggest that we have new accounting systems. Carbon accounting is complex, and at present we are not introducing it at the basic level. Also suggests that every community, every part is unique. So when we take a commodity-based approach, or if we have yesterday a particular set of tools and another retail set of tools, not only does our farm have to deal with multiple standards, perhaps, but multiple technologies and multiple information systems. I propose that there's a new services industry. It's not unique. The European Commission projects a couple of years ago, not annual, but sustainability, who looked at intensification and the use of sensors. As an example, we have drones now as global production activities. Data integrity is a well-defined discipline, and being able to develop that capability and competence around level is something that is going to be vital. All that is happening at present potential is that we are creating more barriers to people around level. So I want to sort of turn it on its head to a certain extent, this conversation at time, but say that unless there is a concerted effort to develop standard data integrity rules and apply them and data practitioners around them, we will not be able to trust the data.
Thank you very much. There's 2 points from this slide. What do you see the future in terms of visibility? What we saw at this
recipes or frozen pizzas? Or how do you make the complexity there?
Thank you. So, fascinating presentations, especially for non-standard stuff. But I just wanted to take on something that you said. I'm assuming there was no communication literal when you say that you trust brands with safety of their food, not to say perhaps whether all markets, then your questions of food safety important to them. And so following that, why don't you trust them with sustainability? I just want to check whether or not that was more of a provocation to thought, because I can list a whole armful of reasons why I don't trust brands necessarily to do productive sustainability. But the question is, are we confounding just standardization of certification with sustainability? One isn't necessarily the other, right? Conforming to a specific standard, adhering to that standard does not mean that we are going to have sustainability as a whole. So, just wanted to check on that.
Thank you very much. Only a few minutes left. So, there is a question. I guess it's kind of how we can so much worry, sorry, but still, if you could all be instructed take back some of these questions to
No, you're right. I think it's a question about brands. Some brands are stronger than others. The question is about how much third-party verification we need. What's the role of regulation and the controls that are put into place or failed to put into place by governments and third-party certification systems? So what are those enablers, and is there a way to make them work better so that in the end there's less cost? And by the way, talking about cost, just to as a remark, talk about the distributions from the leverage and what goes back to the farmer and what has been shared.
One question I address when you comment about data standards, I think that's a very interesting topic. How do we get there? I'm not sure. Calls into question the role of regulators and governments and industry. It's not to say it's impossible, it's just to say it's an interesting question. I agree with you. Getting to that would be great. So, yeah, the aggregated data, I think it's an interesting idea. The European laws about data integrity, keeping away somebody else's saying no, which is really interesting. It goes back to the big data, what can you release, what can you not. So it's under question. Our legal team is spending an astonishing amount of money for a number of different topics, covering several things.
So in terms of the traceability of the products, the downstream traceability from our factories to our consumers, well, at least to our to the retail we work, or to the consumers in the case of espresso, we direct directly. We have to a high amount, very high percentage. We know exactly because we have the technology there in terms of the labels on the products, the pallet codes, and so on and so forth. Our real challenge is on the upstream. It's always in the upstream because the upstream will impact those frozen pizzas. The ones in the US, to a supplier of but anyway, so really our challenge is in the upstream, and particularly on the upstream when it's the very small holder farmers, which is the case for the dairy, for the coffee, for the cocoa, which are some of the biggest commodities. So really, that's where our challenge is, and that's why I think my presentation is focused on that. And then to come to yes, I mean, I'm really looking forward to some global standard, so that to be able to trust that we would need to spend so much money to be done on our own.
Yeah, I'll try to capture all the questions in one answer that is short. Let's see. At first, of course, you have to consider who's the owner of the data. And do not avoid that question before you're going to use it, because it's key. Then we are very much behind having a uniform, generalized, standardized, science-based system. With the product description. And what we need to keep in mind when we talk about all these kind of processes is that we do not like to automate bureaucracy. So look at it from the other side. Again, I mean, we have enough examples of automated bureaucracy. Thank you very much. I would love to continue the conversation, keep you over here for another hour at least, but I guess some of you may be starving. I wish to really thank a lot for panelists who did a great job. I want to thank you all for your questions, for your motivation, and actually driving this discussion. So a big applause to them. And then, of course, lunch break, we will reconvene after. The discussion is actually interesting as well. So thanks for being with us. And bon appétit. Thank you.